that are challenging. The book of Wisdom speaks of condemning the just one. He's obnoxious to us. Speaks of revilement and torture and wanting to condemn. St. James speaks about jealousy, selfish ambition. He talks about wars, conflicts among us, your passions like coveting, envy, even killing, fighting and waging war. And Jesus addresses the ambition of his own disciples. There are times when I simply feel like probably you, world weary. World weary. When I look around the world and when I look close to home, when I see missiles being fired out of Israel into Lebanon and into Gaza, missiles being fired between the Ukraine and Russia, when I hear and see in the news famine in Sudan because of the warring people, when machete-wielding gangs torment Haiti, when the lie about a stolen election in Venezuela results in repression of the opposition, wars, violence of all kinds in our world. When I listen to our own political rhetoric here in the United States, the heat of that and what it causes, it makes me weary. Listening recently to one family, not in our parish, just in case you start to look around, but on his side of the family, a brother who speaks so violently to their mother, who is now in hospice care, to the point where a lawyer has to get involved to keep that son away from his mother. The other side of that family, squabbling now over inheritance, unable to deal with the grief of parents' loss, and unable to let go of stuff, afraid that somebody else is going to get the stuff. The animosity of all of that. So the world in which we live, there is so much, whether it's worldwide, our country, or in our own families, we're affected by all of these kinds of things. When Jesus was on the road to Jerusalem with his disciples, on the road to his own suffering and death, that his disciples did not want to hear about. They weren't ready to hear about the man they loved talking about suffering and death. And so they shut down, which sometimes we do. When we don't want to deal with stuff, we just shut down, which is what they did. But worse than that, they let their egos emerge, and they get into an argument about which one of us is the greatest. Now we know Muhammad Ali was the greatest. The arrogance of that, though, too. But those guys talking about which one is the greatest among us 12 disciples, who've listened to Jesus, and we're still stuck with this ambition. And Jesus addresses that because he hears them talking. He addresses that and has to remind them again and again and again that that kind of ambition has no place in his kingdom. You wonder what was going on in the communities of that day. The letter of St. James was probably written only within the first 2 decades of the church. What in the world was going on in that community that James had to write this kind of a letter and caution against all this negative stuff that goes on? And what was going on in the community to whom Mark was addressing his gospel only maybe a 3rd decade away from the death of Jesus? Mark paints the most unkind picture of the 12 disciples. Of all the Gospels, Mark paints a picture of guys who just don't get it. What was he addressing in the church? What was he addressing possibly in the leaders of the church of his day already? That they needed to hear again caution that we have to be servants to one another. And to dramatize that, because Jesus knew his words were hitting a brick wall, his words didn't seem to be penetrating his disciples, he takes a child that's there in their midst, embraces the child, the vulnerable one, the innocent one, the little one, and says, you've got to receive this child. You've got to receive those who are vulnerable. And if you do that, you receive me. And yet not me. You receive the one who sent me. You know, how do we who follow Christ, how do we who really do want to follow Christ, how do we respond to the pain and the hurt, the war and the violence that goes on all around us? It sounds too simple, but one thing we can do is hug a child. Just hug a child. And let the goodness and the innocence of a child kind of go into us. It happens. Nothing brings a smile to someone's face or a chance to forget for a moment all the violence and the ugly stuff when we hug a child. Now we just sent them all away. But they'll be back. They'll be back. Honestly, that's one thing we can do as followers of Christ. And the other thing is to temper our own rhetoric, to temper our own talk in a divided world and a sometimes divided church. To just be more careful about how we speak of those who we think are obnoxious. How we speak about them. Do we just add to the violence? Do we just add to the wrongness of all that? By even the tone with which we address some of our political issues. We can bring the temperature down, perhaps, a little bit as we try to remember, I am not a Democrat. I am not a Republican. I am a follower of Christ, first of all. I may be a Republican, I may be a Democrat, but first of all, I am a follower of Christ. What does being a follower of Christ inspire me to do, and how should I act? We have to keep coming back to Christ when we are engaging with our world, with our nation, with one another. So Jesus, knowing that his words were falling on deaf ears so often, just decides to take the child, embrace the child, and remind us we have to be servants. We are in the service of one another. And it's just a small step, perhaps, toward a more peaceful world, a more peaceful family life, a more peaceful nation. If little by little, at least, we try to absorb what children have to teach us. Anyway, it's a hard world, isn't it? There's just so much that can pull us down. But keeping Christ in our eyes, keeping the words and the example of Jesus in front of us, is one way that we can try in some positive way to face the trials, to face the ugliness, and to try to bring something more good into this world.